So is your authenticity making you better, or is it making you worse as narcissistic supply? This is going to be an unsatisfying answer. You know what I'm going to say. The answer is both. Listen, authenticity is not an easy thing to focus on, especially for someone who grows up in a narcissistic family system. It can feel like defiance to even think about being authentic. It can feel terrifying. Because when your authentic self did show up when you were a child, you were shut down, you were mocked, you were degraded, you were humiliated, you were called selfish. To survive in one of these family systems, you had to shut your authentic self down. It doesn't disappear, but it does get buried deep. And the hard work of adulthood becomes the unearthing of it. And the associated fear with showing up as more authentic, because it was once utter devastation if you did do that. So the answer to that question about supply is both, because it is both. An authentic person might initially be considered an almost more worthy opponent for the narcissistic person, or even just a worthy something, and that makes them great supply. An authentic person sort of raises the idea of sport for the narcissist. Can the narcissistic person ultimately break them down? It's a heavier target. It's not even that the narcissistic person clocks another person as authentic, but the narcissistic person can perceive that their usual tricks aren't working with an authentic person, who, for example, may not be oohing and eyeing over the narcissistic person's grandiose nonsense, or doesn't succumb to the gaslighting, or who may even disengage when it's clear that this relationship is not a reciprocal interaction. The narcissistic person may even mock the authentic person, laugh at them, ridicule them, and the authentic person may sort of shrug. And then the narcissistic person might get frustrated and might even write the authentic person off as a loser, as a nobody, and just be completely dismissive, and that's that. You know from prior videos that I am sick and tired of this framing of everyone who gets into a narcissistic relationship as being a sort of shrinking violet, a gazelle with a broken leg, an insecure, meek person who is just swallowed up whole by the narcissistic person and cannot advocate for themselves. Many people are at the top of their game when they meet a narcissistic friend or partner. They may be at a time when they are enjoying life, that they know who they are and what they stand for, what matters to them. But if you do not understand what narcissism is, which until relatively recently, a lot of people did not. It's tricky. What then happens is that as the love bombing fades and devaluation and dismissiveness kick in, your authenticity turns you into not such good supply anymore. Initially, your authenticity may mean that you show up strong in a narcissistic relationship, which is in fact very attractive to narcissistic people, especially communal and grandiose narcissistic folks. They may be drawn to your confidence, success, and presence. That doesn't mean they don't resent it. And that doesn't mean that they're going to want to maintain any form of balance or equity in the relationship. You are great supply because you're kind of at a good, healthy level, and bringing someone down confident is far more interesting for a narcissistic person than breaking down someone who is already anxious around them. As time goes on, your authenticity may actually become an annoyance, because authentic people may either reasonably fight back, not budge, or not engage. And none of those are things that a narcissistic person likes. Listen, the fight is often when narcissistic folks are at their best. So if your authentic self fights back, that can definitely mean that you remain good supply, but are now in a relationship that is going to be contentious, combative, and volatile, and that may not be what you want. And love is a tricky thing, because being authentic doesn't mean that you will not fall in love with a narcissistic person. You may. the charm, charisma, confidence, whatever else they bring to the table will feel real for a moment in time. So the authentic person can still experience some trauma bonding and all the rest of it. An authentic person may also find that giving up on themselves is the only way this works. And if the relationship actually feels like it matters, and attachment often does, even an authentic person may give in a little bit. Theoretically, if we could teach everyone in the world to hold on, or even develop in the first place, and then hold on to their authentic selves, and then understand that if your authentic self is being chipped away to leave, well then that's the win, and that's frankly healing. What is challenging is that we can intellectually appreciate this, but it's a lot harder in real life, especially a world in which we are given the repeated message that relationships are supposed to be work and sacrifice and forgiveness is great and you got to give people repeated chances. But the people being given the chances and the forgiveness aren't changing. So it's a really bad cycle for the person who's doing all the forgiving. This, of course, also begs the question that some of you wonder about if you made it this far in this video, which is, what the hell is authenticity? Honestly, it's not easy. It's doing the deep dive on who you are really and how you have been shaped by your circumstances. It's checking yourself against the pressures of what the world wants you to be and the need to be part of a social system, but not giving up what matters to you in the face of that. It's not just about speaking your mind without empathy or awareness, or even awareness that your words could hurt someone else. It's not that. Even if your words feel authentic and honest to you, you understand that you have to take into account and recognize you can evaluate a situation and take an action that feels true to you. Maybe you don't say something hurtful to your toxic sister when you're in the midst of other people, but you answer her questions honestly or give feedback respectfully, which she will still say is mean and you're awful, and etc., etc. But then also reflect on how healthy it is for you to even be in this space. So there's a lot of constant checking in with yourself. Authenticity doesn't mean you're always happy and cheerful, but you know who you are and you act and feel in accordance with that, and you give yourself permission to do that. You don't keep shaping yourself to a situation, but you bring your whole self into the situation and assess and reassess consistently. Ultimately, authentic people who are also informed about narcissism are not good supply for narcissistic folks, because pretty early on, you don't play their game, you don't fluff them, you don't sit by quietly while others are getting hurt, you don't pretend that things are just going to get better. Initially, the narcissistic person may get frustrated with you, and then they may try to break you down, and then may scoff and sneer at you and say, you aren't worth it, and then may mock you, and then that's that. The narcissistic person may launch into a smear campaign against the authentic person. But the authenticity becomes a really interesting hedge against that because they know who they are. It all sucks, it's deeply unfair, but authenticity still remains one hell of an antidote. Remember, narcissistic people live their lives in a way that they allow the external world to tell them how they feel, and the external world fills an internal need. They need to offset their insecurity and shame and keep their hollow ego inflated. So they constantly chameleon to the demands of the outside world, status, success, power, whatever matters to them in this world. Authentic people live a life that's very internally mediated. They don't succumb to the pressures of the external world that aren't in line with their values, which means part of being an authentic person is figuring out what your core values are. And that can mean that truly authentic people's social worlds can shrink, and that they are content when they are living in line with their values, even if everyone else isn't around for the ride. And in that way, the narcissistic person may not be able to mount the same threats of abandonment and humiliation against an authentic person. Listen, my wish would be that we developed an education system that allowed kids to develop their authentic selves rather than sitting robotically at desks and taking tests that legislators demand to satisfy some need, to cultivate a love of reading or writing or creating or building that is in line with a child. And if that educational space felt safe, which it should for the child, then the other learning would just flow more naturally. I know some kids who would have absolutely mastered history or math if it had just been taught while they were able to move physically. And since a lot of kids have to go home to families who deny their authentic selves, and very likely may be quite emotionally abusive, having a safe space where their authentic self could be explored would be extraordinary, maybe the only space they've got. Most authentic people I have met, and there haven't been many, tend to be older, are shaped by the world, right? People who said to me, man, I once did get married, knowing full well it wasn't who I was, but there was a cultural pressure. And after they got out of it, they never got married again and maybe even never got into a conventional intimate relationship again. So they did succumb to the world, and then they learned really who they were. Others said that they had worked jobs they hated, they got degrees that they didn't use or want, and slowly the authentic self could finally emerge, and they lived as themselves. And frankly, you can be in a job you hate and retain your authenticity. Being authentic isn't about living on a beach somewhere. It is about seeing through what you have to do, because you still got to pay the electric bill and do the things you have to do, but not bend and give up yourself for the circumstance. The more authentic you are and the more toxic the situation and the less possible the escape from that toxic situation, the harder this becomes. It takes a minute to live and learn those lessons. And whether you grew up with a narcissistic parent or parents, or have experienced trauma, or have endured an abusive narcissistic relationship of any kind, none of that is a barrier to authenticity. It can make it harder, but it doesn't block it. But to do this daily work can feel like an abyss. It's a breaking of the indoctrination of the only way to be loved is to be what someone else wants, needs, or demands. And it can take a minute to break out of that cycle. And the beautiful thing is that while the narcissistic person may view your existence as an authentic person as something that offends them and may try to break you down, once you get it and you're committed to the daily work of being authentic, and it's not like you get to authenticity and it stays that way. It's a daily battle, and it's often quite an uncomfortable one. And then the fact is the narcissistic person won't be as interested in you. I've seen it happen with my own eyes. It's almost like the bounce you see when an insect approaches, but you're doused with repellent. It's like the narcissistic person just starts avoiding the authentic person. But this is a long game, folks. And at the core, it's bigger than just healing from a narcissistic relationship. It's about giving yourself permission to be you. And just finding you can be a lot of work after being raised by narcissistic parents or being through a narcissistic relationship. But that quest to honoring yourself, figuring out who that is, and finding times and spaces in your life where you can live as that person is the ultimate work of being a human being. Thanks again.